Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. As we enter our second year of the global COVID-19 pandemic, with record numbers of both cases and deaths, our schools, businesses, and governments are still struggling to deal with the health, economic, mental, and societal impacts of the latest Omicron variant. This all adds to the ongoing uncertainty of our ever-changing indoor and outdoor, vaccinated and unvaccinated protocols, and the politics of the pandemic that will drive how we all come back together as a unified or fractured community. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
And, 1 in 10 face homelessness. There's issues around even food security, housing issues. We are adjacent to all the issues that you see for workforces across the state of California. We have those too. And we need to really understand and lift up the value of the creative process and investing in creativity.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Eric Estrada, the associate producer of Voices of the Community. George is recovering from ear surgery, so I'm your host for today's episode. One of the sectors most impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic is our arts and cultural sector. With very high unemployment for workers, as well as arts and cultural organizations losing over 50% of their income and struggling to stay alive without live performances and ticket sales, for example. This episode is focused on the importance and economic impact of the arts, culture, and artists on both our economy and our communities. We are hosting a panel of guests from the San Francisco Arts Commission, Californians for the Arts, and Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Before we begin, we thought it would be helpful to provide a little context on the arts and culture economy on the national, state, and local level, and the COVID-19 impact on the organizations and artists that make up the arts and culture economy. According to a March 2020 report by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, in 2020, arts and culture added $876.7 billion, or 4.2% to our national GDP. With the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, between 2019 and 2020, the U.S. arts economy shrank nearly twice the rate of the economy as a whole. Arts and culture production fell by 6.4%, when adjusted for inflation, compared with a 3.4% decline in the overall economy. Between 2019 and 2020, the arts economy shed more than 604,000 workers, not counting self-employed artists and other cultural workers. On a state level, according to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis report, arts and cultural productions account for $225 billion of value to the California economy, or around 7.5%, and contributes over 680,000 jobs. On a local level, the findings from the March 2021 study conducted by the Bay Area Council Economic Institute on the economic and social impact of the arts in San Francisco found that in the fiscal year 2019, San Francisco nonprofit arts organizations generated $945 million in economic output, which supports 9,657 jobs.
This episode is focused on organizations that are working with our artists, art, and culture organizations to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic on both the state and local level. I'm joined remotely by the Executive Director of Californians for the Arts, Julie Baker, and the Director of Cultural Affairs of the San Francisco Arts Commission, Ralph Remington, along with the Director of Community Investment of the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Jason Blackwell. Welcome to Voices of the Community, Jason, Ralph, and Julie. So I'd like to start with the first topic really is just a quick background on each of your organizations for our audience. So I think I'm going to start with you, Julie, so you can give us the kind of the state picture and then go to Ralph and then go to Jason.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, George. Thanks for having me. I'm Julie Baker. I'm the Executive Director of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. So we operate both a nonprofit organization whose mission is really to build public will for the value and impact of the arts and culture, creative industries, and workforce, as well as build tools for people across the state to become effective arts advocates, both locally at the state and at the federal level. On a C4 side, which is a lobbying organization, California Arts Advocates, that's where we directly try to influence legislation and investments at the state and federal level for arts, culture, and creativity.
Thank you. And Ralph, tell us about the San Francisco Arts Commission.
Yes, thank you. I'm Ralph Remington, Director of Cultural Affairs for the San Francisco Arts Commission. And San Francisco Arts Commission is an organization of the city and county of San Francisco that advocates for arts and artists, advocates, funds, energizes, helps activate the public space, and all things arts and culture related fall under the San Francisco Arts Commission as far as advocacy efforts in the city and county of San Francisco. From the onset of the pandemic in March of 2020, many of our organizations realized the significant and very real impacts that the public health order and the citywide shutdowns would have on the arts community. So luckily, we were able to mobilize and shift focus to help utilize various sources of emergency funding to support arts organizations and artists who have continued to need support over the past 2 years.
Thank you, Ralph. And Jason, turning to you, tell us a little bit about Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, or YBCA, as everyone is into acronyms these days.
Definitely, George. Again, thank you for inviting me today. My name is Jason Blackwell, Director of Community Investments here at YBCA, or Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. I am relatively new to my role, so I've only been here about 6 months, so I am going to read this directly to make sure I don't get anything incorrect. YBCA opened to the public in 1993 and was founded as a cultural anchor of San Francisco's Yerba Buena Gardens neighborhood. Our work spans the realms of contemporary art, performance, film, civic engagement, and public life, centering artists as essential to social and cultural movements. YBCA is reimagining the role of artists and what art institutions can play in the communities that it serves. Our mission is to generate culture that moves people. And we're living really directly into that mission with our most recent strategic plan of activating, championing artists and advocacy, creating space for artists and community development, community work, as well as our investment portfolio, which is I'm at the helm of, where we're going to start using art as a tool for community development and placing more financial resources into artists' hands.
Great. Thank you. So I wanted to provide for the audience a little bit more context on why I wanted to bring you all together. And that is from each of your perspective, kind of, get your take on the economic impact of our arts and cultural economy. And Julie, I'm going to turn to you because you've done a lot of work on this on both the state level and then helped, work at a regional and even a granular kind of city or county level, with regards to working with organizations to help them, and to talk a little bit about our upcoming, we're coming into April, which you've helped create as an entire month-long process for organizations to really lobby, their statewide government. So take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, number one, yes, we are a mighty force in the state of California. I mean, we're 25% of the nation's creative economy and industries are located here in the state of California. We're ahead of agriculture and transportation in terms of our gross domestic product output, over $235 billion industry. And we employ, in the height, close to 750,000 people in the state just directly, not in terms of value add as well. In the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis numbers just came out, and from 2019 to 2020, we lost close to 100,000 jobs in the state of California for the arts and culture workforce. So the impact, as we know, of COVID has been tremendous. It continues. We're not through this. We're not done. The relief that we've received both at the federal and state and local level, which I know Ralph and Jason can speak to in terms of San Francisco's commitment, has basically been the lifeline, right? But hasn't been the lifeline equitably for everyone. And it certainly hasn't always been the lifeline for the workforce. And so that's why you're seeing these numbers. The other thing that is important in terms of numbers is that those only capture people who are full employees. And yet people in the arts are 3 times more likely to be self-employed. So we have to take a real deep look at who is this workforce. We, of course, as advocates, we know the value, but how are they truly being, sustained by both public policy, our local investments, the, organizations like what YBCA has been doing with guaranteed basic income pilots. Those sorts of things are, I think, what we've all had really come to realize, particularly with the highlight of what the pandemic has shown us, and particularly with the emphasis and disproportionate impact to our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, our rural communities, the places where there is not philanthropy invested at the same level, are reliant on the public sector. So relating that then to what you mentioned in terms of April, in 2019, Californians for the Arts with the legislature and Senator Ben Allen from Santa Monica coined Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. So it is every April in the state of California. That's at first it's a time to let's celebrate, okay? Let's actually recognize who we are and say, yes, we make an impact. But at the same time, it's also our moment to lift ourselves up, both in celebration and also in terms of what are the needs? What can we offer and what do we need in exchange? And this is what we have to do at a state level, at a federal level, and a local level. It's important to do it in April in the state of California because the budget process is happening. The governor introduces it in January. There's a May revise. The budget passes by typically around June 15th is when the legislature signs off, and then it goes back to the governor. So this is a really important time for us to collectively lift our voices and say that the impact that we make in the state is not in correlation to the investment the state makes. We are still 66 cents per person per capita in the state of California in baseline investment in the arts. We pale in comparison in terms of what we bring in terms of economic and social impact. So, I think it's the moment for all of us to work together to make sure that our legislature, our administration understand what the needs are, and in particularly to emphasize those who have not had the level of investment, as well as the workforce that is really, I would say, very, very vulnerable. That is what we have learned these last several years. And, 1 in 10 face, homelessness. There's issues around even food security, housing issues. We are adjacent to all the issues that you see for workforces across the state of California. We have those too. And we need to really understand and lift up the value of the creative process and investing in creativity.
Thank you. And Ralph, turning to you again, I think, the San Francisco Art Commission, for a lot of listeners and for perhaps even a lot of people who are resident in San Francisco, don't understand the economics, if you will, the economic impact of arts and culture on San Francisco and how the Arts Commission works to foster that, and share a little bit about, from your perspective, how COVID-19's impacted the Art Commission's work, but the artists and the arts and cultural organizations themselves that you work with.
Sure. Well, it's interesting working in the arts sector. I am an artist myself. I'm also obviously an arts administrator. I worked in the arts my entire life. My father was a visual artist. So I have a certain appreciation for the arts, just individually, personally, right? But then a lot of people that I've run across, and I'm sure this is not a isolated incident that the others on this call probably can relate to, but they say, well, artists knew they were getting into a risky profession anyway. They're not eating in the best of times. So why should we support them now? And I think coming from myself, just divorcing myself from it and standing back and looking at it with a perspective, I can see how people had that perspective, right? They're like, hey, they got themselves into this, now times are bad. And now, of course, things are worse. But the thing that people don't realize is if we don't have artists and if we don't have art and if we don't have culture, then what's the point of living? And, you don't have design, you don't have buildings, you don't have movies, you don't have plays, you don't have music, you don't turn on the radio and hear anything because there's no point in having a radio unless you're listening to talk. So, I mean, all of these things that and even the very nature of the pandemic itself, when you look at the very nature of the pandemic, and what we needed to get us through it, art largely got us through the pandemic, ironically enough. Because without Netflix and Hulu and all the cable stations and movies and on-demand entertainment, where would we have been without those things to fill that time and to ease our minds a little bit? And so that was the only place where we could actually see full human faces again. Think about that. Like when we're in the public realm, you're not even seeing that. So I just kind of want to set that philosophical perspective before I get into kind of what San Francisco does, because that's where San Francisco is coming from, in that arts and culture are part and parcel of everything that we do. It's like the water we drink, like the air we breathe. It's not a luxury. It's not something that to be practiced for the elite. It is for all of us. And I can literally say that growing up as a Black child in West Philadelphia, that the arts saved my life, literally saved my life, and showed me different ways and different skills of processing anger and resentment and all of the despair that I saw around me. The arts helped me to do that. And so I would be in prison or dead if it weren't for the arts. And I firmly believe that. So with that in mind, San Francisco, we put a lot of emergency funding in place. I'm fairly new to my role as well. I know Jason is much newer to his current role, but I've been here a year and a couple of months. So I'm still learning the community. I'm still learning the issues and the struggles. But with that in mind, I came in during the pandemic. The Universal Basic Income program had just got started, had just kind of passed through, and our partnership with YBCA really built that up and helped it to become much more impactful than it was, because they were able to leverage private dollars with Jack Dorsey's foundation. And so there was the guaranteed income pilot, right, that we talked about. The city was the initial funder of this program. It supported 130 artists, providing $1,000 for 6 months. The city's initial investment of $870,000 leveraged $3.4 million in private funds to extend and expand the program. And that was from Jack Dorsey's foundation. The Artist Power Center, YBCA, in partnership with YBCA, the city funding supported the development and expansion of this innovative online platform for artists, creatives, cultural workers, funders, employers to connect and access resources and opportunities. Other cities have had it around the country. Springboard in Minnesota comes to mind, but this is a much more impactful program for our area, and that we've been missing for quite some time. And so we're glad to see that get up and going. The Reopening Safely program supported 69 arts and culture nonprofits with facility-related expenses to provide new safety measures for their staff, for visitors and audience, and to help keep venues open safely. Then there's the Dreamkeeper Initiative. So through this initiative, the Arts Commission has invested $2.1 million in arts and culture organizations to anchor support for the cultural assets and economic vitality in historically Black and African American communities facing rapid change and impacts resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. So our funds are supporting 6 Black theaters, many grants to organizations and individual artists, collaborative initiatives to create art, host events and activities to help celebrate Black culture. Dreamkeeper Fund from OEWD, the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, are also supporting a workforce development program for artists to become financially successful cultural workers and to bring artistic productions that showcase African American art and culture to the Bayview, Hunters Point, and Potrero Hill neighborhood. Additionally, in February 2022, the mayor announced $4.7 million of funding to support the Chinatown and AAPI and the Latinx community. And then we have some upcoming programs this summer. The commission will launch a new grant initiative for artists and arts organizations who have never received funding from either the Arts Commission or Grants for the Arts. And so the San Francisco Arts Commission wants to broaden our support and focus our funding to those who have been left out and have not had the opportunities to access our funds. And this program will do it. So this will be made possible through the Arts Impact Endowment Fund, and look out for more information for that this summer.
Great. Thank you, Ralph. That was a great overview. And Jason, turning to you, I would love to get your take on where you feel the COVID has impacted artists. You worked for Grants for the Arts for a while before YPCA as well. And YPCA has kind of been the center of this ecosystem of funds flowing from the city and private, et cetera. But I'd love to get your take on how COVID's impacted artists, where you see it going, and, from your perspective, seeing arts and culture as an economic redevelopment tool.
Definitely. Hearing Julie and hearing Ralph speak on the depth of experience in which both of their organizations have been working in this field versus YBCA, who just really started being a development or a financial space for artists and arts organizations during the guaranteed income pilot. And now through the two initiatives that we're now funding, we just are expanding our investment pillar and seeing what we can do as a community-driven organization. But I want to take a step back and think about the Arts and the Economy report that was produced and created by San Francisco Arts Commission, Grants for the Arts, San Francisco Travel Association, as well as the War Memorial, and really look at the intersection of where arts is just beyond the arts ecosystem, and what the arts does for the economy is beyond what we do on stages or in galleries, and how that report really spoke directly to how we activated corridors and spaces across San Francisco, how it was an intersection of the mom and pop restaurant, as well as the winery, as well as the show itself, that really charged the economic and the economic recovery, or charged the economic corridors of those spaces. And that without those organizations having performances, having gallery openings, that's when the darkness came to those areas and really affected the economy of San Francisco. And I think with the work that Julie's doing, with the work that Ralph's doing, and recharging and allowing for that vitality to come back to those sections, then now the economy is becoming stronger and fostering better connections with the artist groups that are in their areas, but also across the city itself, of people seeing how, without this driving force, how integral art is for everything else to continue in its own way. So that's something I really, really have been thinking about lately, of like, what is a way that we can communicate that and expand that narrative of how essential the arts are to the economic recovery of the city when it comes to food, culture, and when it comes to transportation, and when it comes to any other facet that we really rely on to make this place a very central place for arts and culture in the country. With YBCA specifically, we are really leaning into these three different pillars of the organization. One being championing, being an advocate for arts and arts organizations from the smaller level of local government, and being that hub for local government dollars to be pervasive across the community itself. And then we're also going up to state governments, as our former executive director, Deborah Cullinan, was part of Gavin Newsom's creative art task force team, and moving on the dial when it comes to moving funds to the CAC, or California Arts Council, and how it could be then trickle down to other local economies. So I think that was one of the strong pillars that we really wanted to focus in on, is like, how can we use our beautiful building, our access to power and to resources to really champion what arts and what arts advocacy could look like from a local community arts perspective. Next is really create, which is what we've always been doing, using our space as a place to show our gallery space, to offer rentals and to performing artists and things like that. But really moving it towards a community-driven, community-focused type of approach, using mostly local artists, really speaking to how can we invite people in who have never been invited in before, and really trying to change the narrative of what YBCA is as a center, as is now community-driven, community-focused, and the Artist Hub is our Artist Power Center. It's part of that, being a place of community resources, being a place of community collective knowledge and approach. And then our last step is really the investment pillar, which includes our guaranteed income pilot, which is model now that's being repeated across other community centers, and are looked to across the state as a primary example of how this could work and what it should look like in practice. We received some funds from the Hewlett Foundation to really bring artists together again since the pandemic, which is through our Artist Power convenings, of just getting artists to talk about how can we creatively solve these problems that are going to exist after the pandemic is over with. How can we recharge the arts economy across the Bay Area? So we have 5 different rounds across the 10 Bay Area counties of providing a small startup funds, $2,500, for artists to get together again with their colleagues and reimagine what it could be like post in the new normal, as we like to say. And lastly, we are partnering with the CAC, the California Arts Council, to do a statewide relief program for artists and cultural practitioners. We are currently in the design phase. We're having community listening sessions with community partners across the state, trying to reach those in our prioritized communities and those whose artistic practice are deeply rooted in those marginalized communities, as well as those in rural counties that might not have as much access to resources and philanthropy dollars, like Julie mentioned earlier. That is really going to be $1,000 check, one-time payment. It's part of a federally qualified disaster, so non-taxable money that artists can use to really just revitalize their financial health. And we hope that it will make a nice splash across the state. We know it's not a lot of money. We know that it's about 1,900 artists that are going to be affected or are going to be awarded through this program, but we know that there's going to be more dollars to come, and that once we really see what is used and how the needs need to be met, YBCA wants to be a central pillar and really disseminating that across the Bay Area, but hopefully the state as well.
Thank you. Again, really great, granular, both an overview. I want to circle back for a moment, Jason, on the report, because it was an update of a report that was done with San Francisco Arts Center, and John was on the show back in 2020, along with San Francisco Performances as well. And he talked about the economic impact. And I don't know if you remember the actual number, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head, that report that was put out last fall, was it over $1 billion that the arts and culture economy brought to San Francisco?
I have it right here. Yes, it is over $1 billion. Yes, that was the number that they spoke to in the report.
And I'll send that out again. I included it in a newsletter to folks and have it on my website, but it's the most recent report. And I think it's, back to Ralph and Julie's point as well. I think it's really important for people to understand, that this is a really large part of our economy in California at large, but in San Francisco. So I'm going to turn to you, Julie, because you've spent so much time over the last 2 years working with both federal and state to try to lobby, to write legislation, to help write legislation on really interesting programs. And I always like to call it back to the future, but it's like, during the Great Depression, we had the national arts effort, and everybody thinks of arts as something that's nice to have. But I feel like you've done a great job, and the organization's done a great job, and everyone's been sharing this morning about without arts, where would we be? So please share with the audience a little bit about all of your work on the state level, but you have the Creative Arts Corps coming up, and then their state budget and funding, et cetera.
Yeah, thanks, George. So last year, we worked in coalition with NIVA, National Independent Venues Association of California, California Association of Museums, to ask for $1 billion at the state level for the recovery and relief for arts and culture and the creative workforce. And at the end, we ended up with over $600 million in investments from the state in arts and culture. Included in that was $60 million for the California Creative Corps pilot program. And this goes through the California Arts Council, the state arts agency, as well as $40 million for creative youth development. Actually, the core program was piloted already in San Francisco, because we know lots of things start in San Francisco and then we lift them up at the state level. And so that's where they, really between people like Deborah Cullinan from YBCA, myself, and a number of people across the state working directly with the administration. The governor introduced the California Creative Corps pilot program, and then the legislature supported it. So it's really exciting to see that. That will be coming out, we believe, it's soon by the Arts Council in terms of the grant guidelines, and artists and arts organizations will be able to see themselves in that, in that program. And so they should keep a lookout for our website, and our e-list will also alert people to when those grant opportunities are available. Last year, we were also able to get historic legislation passed, in that it's historic in that there isn't one that exists in any other state, which is the California Creative Workforce Act. And that's Senate Bill 628 that was authored by Ben Allen, and it was sponsored by our organization, California Arts Advocates. And that actually states that creative workforce development is a state priority. That one sentence actually is a game changer, in that we were not seen as part of workforce development. And being able to actually, legislation is language. And so socializing language that actually can impact how funding is then later appropriated, whether it's a different agency that could be doing that, learn apprenticeship programs. The other thing about 628, the California Creative Workforce Act, is that it, again, will prioritize people who have experienced barriers to employment in the creative industries. And it also states that it must be a living wage, earn and learn opportunity communities. So those things were really important to all of us who worked on that bill. This year, however, when you write legislation, sometimes it comes with funding, sometimes it doesn't. Last year, it did not. So this year, our organization is working to get $50 million for that specific program, the California Creative Workforce Act. And so we invite, people in the sector to join us in advocacy. We are also working on $30 million for Cultural Districts program, which was a legislation that passed back in 2016. It has been an unfunded mandate by the state. So again, there's all this great work that happens by artists and cultural communities and creative communities, but a lot of times we're forced to be scrappy, and we're forced to do this really with many people holding 5 or 6 jobs in order to be able to be a creative worker. Our goal is to change that. Our goal is to say that being a creative worker, being an artist, that should be enough. And we should support that. And we should celebrate that. And we should finally value that. And I think that that's what I hope all of us in the sector will work towards together. And again, mentioning that idea about it is, as Ralph was talking about, people don't quite understand how much discipline and hard work it takes to be an artist. And that creative process, it's like asking a scientist to not be paid for the time that they're developing the thing that becomes the big thing that everybody needs, right? It's like saying, can you just put the play on the stage, but we're not going to pay you for all that creative time to write it. We'll just pay you when we can monetize it by selling a ticket. That's absurd. And that's not valuing what creativity is. I think if any state should do that, it's the state of California. And, we export innovation and imagination. That's what we do here in the state of California. So, now is the time. I don't think there's ever been a better time. And so the history of the WPA, the history of CETA, create a community. And so those sorts of things, we need to look to, but we need to reinvent, and we need to invent it based on the fact of what we know today. And we have all the data. You guys mentioned a great report. We have the data. We have the facts. We have the figures. We have the workforce. Let's just finally actually make the investment that can make it truly, truly work.
Thank you. I always love your macro vision and evangelism. It's wonderful. So I want to turn to you, Ralph, because I know you were brought in to really help diversify and, if you will, for lack of a better term, include more people in our arts economy and the Art Commission. So share a little bit about that, but I'd also love to have you share with the audience, how can the audience, because you're a public facing, organization department, how can the audiences listening support your efforts?
Sure. Yes. I mean, I'm the first African-American director of cultural affairs for the San Francisco Arts Commission in the history of the San Francisco Arts Commissions. And that's where we founded, 1932, I think it was. So it's taken us a long time to get here. But while we're here, and since I've been here, I've made 10 hires, and 9 of them are BIPOC, and 1 is a white woman. And so it's an important mantra throughout my career to provide a platform for marginalized and disenfranchised people wherever I am. And I guess some could look at it as self-interest. It is, but I would say it's self-interest as a human being, not just as a Black person, but as a human being. It's in our self-interest to have all people represented, and have all people honored, and all people treasured, and all people have value. And so I think that's why, and when I run into trouble in my career at different times, fighting different authority figures, it's been usually in the name of diversity and inclusion, and which seems ironic in America that we would have to have those fights and those knockdown dragouts. But I was in a job, quite frankly, jobs similar to this, where some members in the community, I will just say in Arizona, when I just left 1.5 years almost ago, I had members of the community say what Ralph is doing is not white enough, like literally said that. And so we live in an America today, and in California, we can get kind of in a bubble where we don't realize that stuff really exists or still exists in that way. But I'm here to tell you that it does. And it's not only just in what people say, but that creates a climate of fear and violence, and a climate that you feel unsafe for your own personal physical safety, just because of what you choose to program or not program, or the art you choose to elevate or not elevate. Yes, it does exist in California too, for sure. And that's the whole thing. And Julie Baker just said that in comment. And that's a fact. And I think the difference between someplace like Arizona and someplace like California is that in Arizona, they know what they're doing and they don't care, right? They don't care that they're flying the flag of repression. In California, people are so certain that they are right and that they are good and that they are not racist. And when you proceed with a certain certitude that you're not something, then you're blind to what you actually are. And so I think that's the case in California. So in California, they believe that they're not. And they think that everything they say, I'm for that, therefore I am good. I'm a good person. And they have this whole good, bad binary, that racism is a good and bad binary. It's not. Good people can be racist. Now, otherwise good people can be racist. It doesn't matter if you're a racist, doesn't mean that you're not a good person. It just means that you have an issue with racism and you got to fix it to be the full human being that you were meant to be. And that's the same with sexism, the same thing. Just because you have daughters or you're married to a woman doesn't mean you're not a sexist. It's you can still be in proximity to people and work with them and even have them in your family, and you still can provide toxicity to their environment. So, I think I'll start it out by saying that. And then I'll say that people can reach us on our website, the San Francisco Arts Commission, and we have programs to hopefully elevate humanity and elevate the environment through arts and culture. And we want our artists here to feel that they have a place, that they have a home, that they have support, that they don't have to leave San Francisco or the state of California to have a life. And we'd like them to stay because, as Julie says, art is our biggest export, especially here in this state. This state creates, or let's say the imagination and innovation that comes out of the state, to paraphrase Julie, is what the world thrives on. The world purchases that. The world wants that. The world needs that. And the world needs us. And they need our artists. So it's important that we support them.
Thank you, Ralph. And Jason, turning to you, how can folks who are listening to the program support your work and your outreach in the community for YBCA to support arts?
Definitely. I really want to piggyback on what Julie and Ralph said about innovation and experimentation. And that is really what YBCA is here to do. We are situated in a place that's very different from state government, very different from local government. We have less strings attached to what we can do and what we can imagine we can do. And when we are living into this new investment pillar, very new to the organization, I'm inaugural in my position, we really want to be a place that models experimentation. We want to be a place that leans directly into community-based, trust-based philanthropy. We really want to be a space that allows us to experiment, to innovate, to create, and have less restrictions on what is possible when it comes to, I want to provide artists with the tools they need to succeed. We want artists to be those tools that are the change makers in their communities, and that art is used as a tool as community development. And with any possible ways of any private dollars, any public dollars that come to our institution that want to try these new experimentations, and at small dollar amounts, like we have received grants for $200K up to $2 million, up to $10 million to do some of our programming. And it can really allow for other arts institutions to replicate the work that we're doing. We really want to see ourselves as a community foundation and task and indeed, as well as is really centralizing those local artists in this Bay Area community that are unbelievable talent, to be a beacon for those artists and those voices as well, and to support those communities that surround us that we have been built out of, and really change the narrative of YBCA being just a pretty place for a lot of travel productions, a pretty place for you to come by, stop by, maybe play some ping pong in the lobby, but also be a central place for community growth and thriving nature of the San Francisco Bay Area. So I guess my call to action would be for anyone who is just wanting to try something different. Myself, our other directors are part of our community or artist management core or impact team with our new interim director, executive director. We are all really here to just listen to new things. We want to be that incubator and that stomping ground for you all to experiment and try different things. We're around community development, artist development, and philanthropy. That's where we are.
Thanks, Jason. And staying with you, I'm going to turn to my next question for each of you, and that is to share a favorite story. You've all been in this ecosystem for a while, but a favorite story of working in the arts and cultural space.
Okay, favorite story of working in arts and cultural space. I think, not to be like self-aggrandizing YBCA by any means, but I got to work with them in my three major capacities when it comes to supporting the arts. I was a program associate at the James Irvine Foundation. I was the associate director of grants for the arts, and I'm currently the director of community investments here at YBCA. And seeing the growth of an organization moving people to be the focus, moving audience engagement to be the primary core reason why they exist, and seeing that transformation over the last 7 to 8 years is just really remarkable from an institution, again, that was seen as an ivory tower, that was seen as removed from its actual community and just forged as a place for beautiful things to happen, to now include beautiful people, to include community in part of their conversation and in their messaging and in the work that they do as such an integral part of who they are and how they want to be that integral part of the ecosystem in San Francisco Bay Area itself has been a joy to watch from its start to now. I know that we have a lot more words to go. We have 10 great YBCA 10 artists that are from the Bay Area, but we want to expand that to as many as possible. We do the YBCA 100 every year, where we really focus in on artists across the Bay Area, across California, that are doing amazing things in their own communities. And we really want to see how that can be grown, how we can find resources and support for these artists, and also how we can all learn and build together. And so I think the transformation of this institution over the last 7 years through my different capacities has been a joy to watch and to see, and I'm happy to be a part of it now.
Thank you. And Ralph, same question, a favorite story in all of your work throughout the country?
I would say my favorite story is how we were able to come together as a community in Tempe, Arizona, and put on the ballot an arts and culture tax, where we asked for 1/10 of a cent, a sales tax, to go directly to arts and culture. And as a result, on a typical year, that would be that we did that in 2018. In a typical year for Tempe, Arizona, that would have been $10 million. I think now they made 13 to 15 million during that first COVID year. And that really illustrates the point and the power of that, because for instance, in San Francisco, we have a hotel tax, and the hotel tax, we lost money because it's tied to the tourism industry. And a sales tax, even though it, is arguably regressive, but it's 1/10 of a cent, so 1/10 of a penny, right? And for 1/10 of a cent, that's $10 million in a place like Tempe. Imagine 1/10 of a cent in San Francisco for sales tax, and we would have not lost money where the mayor had to backfill the money from the general fund to make organizations whole so that organizations wouldn't collapse. But instead, we would have made money. So we would have made money because people were buying. People, every time you buy at Costco, every time you buy at Amazon, every time you buy at Netflix, every time you buy, we're capturing that tax. And the arts and culture sector would capture that tax. So if we had that here. So I think that's my favorite story, because as a result of that, in 2018, Tempe is now in really great financial shape in their arts and culture sector. And you're going to see great things from them in the future because of that. And I think it really stabilizes an arts and cultural environment.
And staying with that for a moment, Ralph, is there an opportunity for folks who are listening in the community to actually step up? And is there a campaign to add 1/10 of a cent? Because the hotel tax fund was great when it was done, 30, 40 years ago. But once again, it shifts it to, yes, I want to support the arts, et cetera, but don't tax me. Tax the person who's here for a convention or on their vacation, et cetera. So is there an effort from your perspective internally? And if not, how can folks help rally that? Because I think to your point, and to everyone's point in today's panel discussion, having an ongoing form of revenue to support the arts only has this wonderful multiplier effect of jobs and economic impact.
So it's a good question. There's no effort currently. I mean, it's a real sticky wicket of a political issue when you talk about tax, right? Because you have to look at, and every environment is different. So San Francisco is not the same as Tempe. Even though Tempe is Arizona and they tend to be tax averse, they swallowed that. And in Tempe, as a matter of fact, any ordinance that is has been supported by their elected officials, the public will usually support it. They have not rejected an ordinance. So unlike San Francisco, which you can't count on it, right? And the mayor would have to put her political capital behind it. It would have to be something that she would have to believe in. And it's hard for, if I were in her position, it's very difficult for politicians to embrace a new tax and support that when they have so many other issues that they have to juggle. So I would say, I don't think there's any effort I know that there's no effort currently to do that. I don't know if there will be an appetite for that just because it's such a political sticky wicket. But, it's certainly, and it's not my place to rally troops because I'm an official in the government. So I have to be in neutrality. But certainly if people did raise it, I think they would have an audience.
Thank you. And Julie, turning to your favorite story in all of your work in the arts and culture, and you've done it on a statewide basis as well. I know it's a hard one.
First of all, if I can respond a little bit to what Ralph is talking about. I mean, dedicated funding streams for the arts is the holy grail. We all want that. And I think that what I would say the call to action is from a statewide perspective is we need to, get a bunch of really brilliant brains in a room and let's start talking about how do we make that happen? Because we're constantly every year trying to get funding from the general budget, similarly at the state level. And, we've had some great success in the last several years, and California's somewhere between $45 and $60 billion budget surplus this year. We can definitely hope for more investments there. But, I think that that's something we all need to be thinking about and looking at why was Tempe successful and what was the narrative that worked there. But anyway, that's just an aside. I'm thinking about that. That's a really hard question, George, for those of us who've been in the arts our entire lives. I mean, obviously getting a text from our lobbyists on October 9th last year that the governor had signed the California Creative Workforce Act was a very thrilling moment in a career. However, I would say, I've done a lot of different things in the arts, but I was the executive director of a performing arts center here in Northern California, in the second whitest community in California. And I felt strongly as one of the main curators for the Performing Arts Center was that it was really our mission was to educate not only to our own history and culture in terms of we're in a gold rush era town that basically almost eradicated our indigenous communities. So ensuring that we were in fact lifting the last 136 remaining members' voices in song and relearning language and in performance at a festival that we were producing. But we also brought Richard Wright's Black Boy Literature to Life as a program that does a monologue. And we did it where we brought in high school students, which again, predominantly white community. And it was during kind of the beginning of Trump's era. And we were starting to see the racists that existed in our community, but it had been quieter, let's just say, coming out. And so we brought that play, and it was really powerful to watch this audience of high school students who many are never been exposed to anything like this, had never read anything like this, to really understand and have some empathy and understand of history and understand what was happening right now in their own communities. That was something that they shouldn't stand by and be okay with. I remember after the performance, the kids were all gathered in the lobby and they started saying to their high school teacher, "We need to read this. Why aren't we reading this?" And the performer was a young Black man from New York City. And he stood there and all these kids were asking him all these questions. And it just felt like, here's the power of the arts to transform someone's perspective and life. And that's, for me, was a remarkable moment.
Thank you. Good stories. And I see a statewide effort for a tenth of a cent, Ralph. In Julie's hands, it could go.
Well, that's I think what I always say is advocacy is never, ever, George, as you know, one person alone. It is the collective. And so what I always want to ask folks to do is join us, join all of us. And for us, April is obviously an opportunity in Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. And our theme this year is that the arts work and that the arts work to heal, to engage and empower youth, to build community, to advance justice, and to create jobs. And we're building sort of narratives, webinars, social media kits, everything around those 5 pillars. And it's all free for everyone to access. And then they can also make appointments to meet with their legislators and tell them the transformative power of the arts and why we need the increased investment at the state level. So, that's my hope that people join us, because it certainly can't be one voice alone. ever.
And so if they wanted to join you, Julie, where would they go? The website?
Yeah, so the easiest place is californiansforthearts.org. I say easy, but it's a long thing to type in. So it's californiansforthearts.org. We're also obviously on social media, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I don't think I've figured out TikTok yet, although we're getting our youth advisory council on it. And so, so the usual places, and you'll be able to get all the information. And we have webinars happening all throughout the month of April, every Friday. And again, all of those are free. So great, amazing thought leaders will be a part of it from around the state and around the country as well, because there's so much good work happening in the arts, culture, and creative sector right now. It's super exciting.
Wonderful. And so before I turn to my final question for Ralph and for Jason, is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to talk about? Any programs, ideas, things that you're doing coming into the late spring, summer that folks can get engaged in or that you need help?
Well, I'll say this, and I thought Kat Daniels was going to be a part of this conversation, but I guess she wasn't. But Kat Daniels from OEWD, Office of Economic and Workforce Development in the city of San Francisco. We've been meeting with her, meeting some members of my staff and I to look at some citywide efforts to help bring back the arts and cultural participation in the public realm. One of the things that I've been looking at just off to the side, apart from this, when I first got on board, was examining why don't we have like a South by Southwest type of thing here in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. And I think now's the time to like start looking at that and start unpacking what that would look like here for the Bay. And so I think we're moving towards trying to create some kind of annualized festival for either San Francisco itself or the Bay in general. And so I think that's what many of the folks and my colleagues around the Bay have been talking about.
That would be amazing. And the economic impact of that would be incredible. So, and Jason, anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to cover with regard to programs?
So YBCA just reopened their doors recently on March 10th, and we have two exhibitions that are opening this week. One is the Healing Project presented by Samora Pinderhughes and YBCA, and the other is the Pedagogy of Hope, Uncage, Reunify, and Heal presented by Gallery de la Raza at YBCA Space. When it comes to investments, we will be launching the California Relief Fund for Artists and Culture Practitioners on late April, which will run for an application period for about a month, and hopefully we'll be able to award out those $1,000 payments to about 1,953 artists across the state by the end of July. So we really would like to help getting the word out and having everyone to apply, and more people apply means next year, hopefully CAC will have more funds to administer and relief. Yes, Julie, fingers crossed.
Great. And Jason, staying with you, I'm going to just ask, this is the same question for all of you. I've been asking this for going on 90 episodes now in over 2 years. And that is, what are some of the good things that you feel could or have come out of the COVID-19 pandemic to support the kind of rebuilding of our arts and cultural economy?
I think for me, it would be the connection across not being in physical space. Even though we're all exhausted from Zoom, we're all exhausted from all the type of video conference systems that I was really active on my board of arts organizations in LA this year. I made many conversations with people in DC and New York. I mean, I think this ability to hopefully still foster these connections when we get on planes and we get to go meet each other in person will still continue. But I think that we feel connected more than ever in a place and a time in which we were divided more than ever. I think that's been a really, really good outcome from this.
That's a great point. I feel similarly that the best outcome, one of the best outcomes from this COVID experience has been the elevation of the digital platform and how it's become an easy, integrated part of our lives now. And I've been talking about this about the theater realm for a long time, that it seems to me that there should be a theater network. If you look at the theater, right, a theater network that, like a Netflix, that has 50 states, and you have a drop-down menu, and you go to Ohio, and you can see like 10 productions that are going on in Ohio. And so you get to know these actors and these artists and these practitioners and makers all over the country without leaving your home, no matter where you are. And more importantly, if we had something like that, those artists wouldn't have to leave where they are and go to very expensive markets where they have to struggle to survive. And therefore, just displacing the artists that are already there in some cases and also decreasing their quality of life. So I think if we expand the digital platform, and particularly in areas like theater and whatnot, so that artists don't have to gravitate to these cultural centers and pay much more money than they can afford. They can stay where they are, make their living, and have a name and have a quote and live their lives.
Nice idea. It kind of ties back to the WPA and the Great Depression, right? The whole idea of a national theater program, in this case with a digital platform.
Not to mention the carbon footprint of everyone having to travel everywhere to do these things, I think is something we've all, I think, benefited from. I used to fly to LA for the day for meetings, which is insane in terms of the carbon footprint. So I'm grateful for the Zoom. And I never thought I'd say I'm grateful for Zoom, but okay, there it is. And yes, Ralph, totally love that concept. And that means that we need more infrastructure dollars for theaters, because every theater then needs to have the equipment to be able to broadcast. And I think that that's something that we should invest in. For me, George, what I think has been sort of the silver lining coming out of COVID, and hopefully we're coming out of COVID, is the recognition, and this is self-serving, that arts advocacy is needed. I think for a long time, our organization has been around 25 years. It was all volunteer led, with people who were just trying to increase the state arts agency's budget because it was $1 million for 10 years. And now I think with what we had to do in order to save lives and the industry in this last 2 years meant that we had to show up in the federal realm and state realm and the local realm. And I think that people recognize that there's power in that and that they can make a difference. And so my hope is that this activity that we've seen in terms of record investment at the federal, state, and local level for the arts is not a moment, but a movement. And that we can take all these pilots and we can make them into policies. And that we can actually all recognize that this has to be a part of our work. We cannot allow public sector to operate on its own. We know what happens when that goes, right? We have got to engage. And when we engage, we can have influence and we can shift and we can change things. That's what I think is a silver lining that came out of this, that people who had never been advocates before were all of a sudden meeting with their elected officials. We did those regional conversations. The survey showed that 76% of the people who took our survey out of the regional conversations, which was like 1,600 people across the state who registered for those, had met with an elected official over the last year. That's pretty good. You know, I mean, ask your average citizen if they know who their state representative is, and likely they'll tell you their congressperson, right? So I think we've learned this, and hopefully we take this and we keep going with it. And so, more arts advocacy.
Wonderful. And Julie, just finishing off with you, you've got obviously April coming up with your artist advocacy month. Is there anything coming into the summer time period that folks can engage with you, or that you see on the horizon coming up on, budget, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, basically, April is our time to sort of get everyone together. The advocacy doesn't just end in April. May is when you'll see the governor's revise. We'll get a sense of what's in there for arts investments. If we don't see what we hope is in there, we got to push really hard to get the legislature to make sure it's a priority, and so that it ends up in the final budget by June 15th. So you'll need to continue to stay engaged. Legislation doesn't, that whole cycle doesn't end until September. We have a long legislative sessions here in the States. It's January through September, essentially. So it's important that people definitely check out all the work that everyone here is doing. And then for us, it's like, read our emails. We don't send them out with words because we're just trying to, fill up a sheet of paper. If we send out an action alert, take action. Any arts advocacy organization is doing that. Take action. It's typically, we make it really, really easy for people. So, sign up at californiansforthearts.org, get on our e-list. see how you can engage at the local, state, and federal level. There are actually currently 7 pieces of federal legislation also happening that could change the landscape as well. There's the Creative Economy Revitalization Act, which is a WPA for the 21st century, $300 million right now in a budget ask for that at the federal level. So there's so much, but we recognize for a lot of people, that's a lot to try and track. So we do our best to distill that down, give it to you in sizable portions, and make it as easy as possible for you to engage.
Wonderful. And Ralph?
Yes, thank you. I think for me, the power of the arts came early, and I was involved with a children's theater company when I got out of Howard University, is where I went to school. And it was a children's theater company. I was the only African-American, the only person of color. There were 3 white women, and we went around some area of the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Maryland, DC, Jersey, New York, and did a show about sexual and physical child abuse. And it was a show that was about an alien who was learning about good and bad touch. And really innocent seeming show, right? Very simple language, very simple costumes and a set that went around and traveled to all these schools. And we went to some of the most rural schools in Pennsylvania, let's say, and where there was no infrastructure, really big satellite dishes on their houses, but not connected to anything, school and the church were the institutions in these little towns. And we would come in, we'd do this play. And after the play was over, we'd do a workshop. And these kids' hands would just shoot up and say, when I'm asleep, my dad comes in at night and this, that, or the other. Or when I'm over my uncle's house, this is what happens. And no one knew that this stuff was going on. But the power of this play to tell them this alien shouldn't be touched in a way that they don't want to be touched, made them think, oh, this is me, and which is what it was supposed to do. And I don't want to be touched in this bad way. And so I need to tell someone about it. And because that's what the alien had to do in the play. And that direct correlation between the creation of art and the impact of art and what it can do to a society or do for a society and a community to help that community and those families heal and get better is just immeasurable. The impact of art is immeasurable. And that's just one example of art in a way that people don't necessarily think about it, but that goes into our schools, that goes and teaches our kids, that has an impact on what they think and feel, and that gives them a sense of their own personal power and majesty, and that shouldn't ever be abused. I think that for me, illustrated for my career the power of what art could do.
Thank you. It's a really powerful story. Any other last moments or thoughts, Jason?
For me, and as I continue to emerge in my career, I have always appreciated the opportunity and space to share with Ralph and Julie and others and who are doing really great work and allow me to learn. Definitely when these conversations of creative economy and how to resource our artists is really essential to the work that I want to continue to do and always be doing. So I just wanted to give you guys praise and thanks for allowing me to share space with you all.
Wonderful.
Hey, right back at you.
Absolutely.
And I would echo that as well. It's been a really wonderful conversation. So I want to thank Julie for sharing her work at California for the Arts, Jason for sharing his work at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and Ralph for sharing his work at the San Francisco Arts Commission. We will make sure that listeners have your contact information, your websites, and social media so that our listeners and community members can engage and support all of your work to our artists and arts and cultural organizations in their process of recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic on both a state and a local level. And I want to please ask all of you to stay safe and healthy as we all work our way through this latest phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, which appears to be coming back again.
That's it for this hour special show focused on the importance and economic impact of the arts, culture, and artists on both our economy and our communities. You've been listening to the voices of the Executive Director of Californians for the Arts, Julie Baker, and the Director of the Cultural Affairs of the San Francisco Arts Commission, Ralph Remington, along with the Director of the Community Investment of the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Jason Blackwell. To make a donation, volunteer, and support the work of Californians for the Arts, please go to californiansforthearts.org. To find out more about the San Francisco Arts Commission's work to support our arts economy through grants, bid opportunities, becoming an art vendor, and Ralph's work to diversify the Commission's work, please go to sfartscommission.org. And to find out more about the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, along with Jason's community investment work through the Artist Power Center, please go to ybca.org. During our 2+ years of producing this special series on the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on both our nonprofits and small businesses, we have shared the voices of a variety of performing arts organizations. A wonderful example we hope you'll listen back to is episode 83, where we hosted a live panel interview with San Francisco Performances, City Arts and Lectures, the San Francisco War Memorial Performing Arts Center, Music at Cole Mansion, and the San Francisco Mime Troupe to share how the pandemic has impacted their organizations and what they were all doing to figure out how to bring back live performances just before the Omicron variant hit late last fall. As Julie Baker mentioned in our interview, the pandemic has provided an opportunity for our community and society at large to see artists as second responders. Here's a quote from Julie on their vision of artists as second responders. First responders save lives. Second responders help put people's lives back together. Artists are essential workers in our society and our economy, helping us recover, reflect, and rebuild.
We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. Today's episode was made possible by the audio wizard and our associate producer, Eric Estrada, and the graphics magic of Casey Nance from Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is supported by a grant from the James Irvine Foundation, dedicated to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. More at irvine.org. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.